Lo and behold, amidst the digitized agora of cyberspace, where pontificators and profligates alike engage in verbal pugilism, there emerges the most labyrinthine dialectical disquisition regarding the interlocutory forays of Hasanabi into the tumultuous ether of Brandon Buckingham vis-a-vis Tyler Oliveira.
Low-key, Sam Hutt, who is a neonate, but the dude that loves him, Brandon Buckingham, even Brandon Buckingham does a better job of covering the subject matter, because at the end of the day, like, Tyler Oliveira goes there with like very overt right-wing sentiment and very overt, like, they're trying to cut right-wing content. But even Brandon Buckingham, who is aligned with does a better job than Tyler Oliveira when he's covering the subject matter, because he treats human beings like human beings and not pawns in a grand narrative that he's trying to put together. Never say that I'm not charitable, even to people who I genuinely think are the awful. Okay? That's what's so crazy about it. Like I said, it's not like I'm a fan of Brandon Buckingham as a person. And I do think that he is, you know, I mean, that's the most insane thing you could say about a person, is that they're like aligned with okay, he's like literally approached me in the past. But I think even Brandon Buckingham does a better job than Tyler Oliveira on this stuff. Clarification is important. He does, I think, Tommy G, and to a certain degree, even Brandon Buckingham. And I don't think these guys are aligned with me in their politics, in the way that they see the world at all. But I think the most important part about the content is, like, when you're talking to real human beings, the interesting part about that is their own personal journey, how they arrive at their own personal convictions. Like, what are the things that happen that that made someone the way that they are? And I think that it's very important to make sure that you approach your subjects with respect in that process. Even if you have a right-wing attitude, not saying that Tommy G does. I'm not entirely familiar with his content, but like, I think the only video I ever watched of his was the Kia Boys. And I thought it was pretty decent. But basically, when you go to these communities and like, and you treat your subject matter like they're zoo animals, objects of fascination that are there to be exploited, rather than like human beings that are on their own personal journey and victim to social conditioning, victim to material conditions, you're going to come across like which I think is exactly the problem that I have with Tyler Oliveira and his coverage.
An odyssey into the concatenated maelstrom of ideological jousting, wherein those with a predilection for polemical pedantry find their tongues tied in Gordian knots of grandiloquent grandstanding. Let it be known, let it be etched into the cosmic tablet of mimetic discourse, that when the pseudonymous sentinels of digital commentary set their rhetorical phasers to incinerate, only those girded with the armor of hermeneutic perspicacity may emerge unscathed. The crux of this affair lies in the juxtaposition of interlocutory methodologies, that of Buckingham, who, despite his ostensible alliance with ideological adversaries, extends a semblance of humanization to his subjects, contra the perfunctory and mechanized demagoguery of Oliveira, whose modus operandi resides in the flagrant objectification of his discursive fodder. One must excavate beneath the superficial sediment of mere reportage to apprehend the fulcrum upon which these methodologies oscillate. Behold, the divergence is not merely one of aesthetic disposition nor mere rhetorical veneer. Rather, it is an epistemological schism of grand magnitude. To address one's subjects as autonomous sentient beings, replete with histories, psychological trajectories, and ideological gestalts, is to engage in the true Socratic tradition. To reduce them to mere spectacle, to the chimeric caricature of bestial exhibitionism, is to fall into the abyss of voyeuristic nihilism. Hasanabi, he who hath navigated the treacherous straits of Twitchian discursivity and emerged, not unblemished, but honed in the fires of perennial internet warfare, does decry the latter approach as a necrotic affliction upon the very sinews of public discourse. What, pray tell, is the nature of this affliction? It is the lobotomization of critical inquiry, the desiccation of intellectual engagement in favor of incendiary spectacle. It is not the dialectic of Hegelian synthesis, but the farcical oscillation of a binary bereft of nuance, wherein the subject is reduced to a mere chess piece in a grand narrative wrought not by veracity, but by virality. Oliveira's sin, if we dare call it thus, is not in his ideological proclivities per se, but in his abnegation of the fundamental precepts of discourse ethics. Where Buckingham, for all his ideological deviance, extends the olive branch of humanization, Oliveira doth wield the cudgel of misanthropic sensationalism. To transform discourse into gladiatorial spectacle is to trample upon the agora wherein true dialogue flourishes. It is to obfuscate rather than elucidate, to render opaque that which ought to be transparent. The perfidious machinations of Oliveira's methodological apparatus render him not a chronicler of contemporary tumult, but a carnival barker of the grotesque. The subjects of his exegeses are not interlocutors, but specimens splayed upon the dissection table of his grand narrative, wherein their humanity is sacrificed upon the altar of algorithmic appeasement. Buckingham, for all his flaws, at the very least recognizes the indelible substratum of the human condition. He acknowledges, however begrudgingly, that beneath the ideological exoskeleton of any given individual lies the sinews of experience, the musculature of existential struggle. Verily, it is a rarefied thing in this epoch of mimetic acceleration to find one who, in spite of ideological incongruity, recognizes the value of genuine engagement. This is the essence of Hasanabi's adjudication, not an endorsement of Buckingham qua ideologue, but a begrudging acknowledgement of his methodological superiority over Oliveira. One must not conflate this with an unqualified approbation. Rather, it is the mere recognition that, within the infernal vortex of digital discourse, even a modicum of humanization is worthy of note. Indeed, as the denizens of the internet bazaar engage in their ceaseless prattle, erecting idols of ephemeral controversy only to raise them in the next cycle of discourse, it is imperative to distinguish between those who engage in narrative construction with a semblance of fidelity to the human spirit and those who, like ravenous hounds, seek only the marrow of sensationalism. To extend empathy is not to abjure critique. To recognize the interiority of one's subject is not to forego rigorous analysis. Yet, in the age of hyperreal fragmentation, where every utterance is but fodder for the ever-hungry machine of digital consumption, this distinction is oft lost. Thus, let this serve as an edict against the malignancies of depersonalization, against the reduction of discourse to a theater of cruelty, against the mechanistic orchestration of human suffering for the vacuous amusement of algorithmic deities. Let it be known that the exigencies of genuine engagement demand not only the wielding of logos, but the tempering of ethos with pathos. For what is discourse, if not the confluence of minds seeking, however asymptotically, the horizon of truth? And so, in the grand coliseum of internet discourse, where the gladiators of ideology clash with the fervor of ancient combatants, let us distinguish between the pugilists of humanization and the jesters of depersonalization. Let us parse, with the acuity of Socratic inquiry, the fundamental distinction between engagement and exploitation. For in this distinction lies the fulcrum upon which the integrity of discourse itself teeters, ever precariously, above the abyss of nihilistic spectacle.